honestly talking about the biggest stories that matter to you the most. Breaking news, John Calipari is finalizing a 5-year deal to become the Arkansas Razorbacks' next head coach, covering college sports like no one else. The biggest guests in sports. We now welcome in Hall of Famer Jim Calhoun.
Such a pride I had, I came to connect.
The legend, Tim Tebow, joins us.
We'll run it back. I like it.
The legend, Herschel Walker. Welcome in, everybody. Little Tuesday morning edition, Air Torres Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Air Torres. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody's having a great day. You know, we went live on Sunday after the selection show. Thought things would calm down in the world of college football. It's actually the exact opposite. We got a jam-packed show for you today. We're going to open Notre Dame, just going scorched earth on everybody. They want all sorts of preferential treatment, including, by the way, from the ACC, who they feel like, oh my goodness, the ACC favored Miami over us. What does it mean? And I think there's an interesting conversation. Is Notre Dame going to try to get out of this ACC agreement that they have? From there, we will continue the conversation. College football transfer portal doesn't open for what, 3 weeks? Well, guess what? Guys are starting to announce, thanks, but no thanks. I'm out. Deuces. We're going to get to some of the big names who have already indicated that they are going to leave and some early indicators on where they may end up. Finally, it's going to be a little bit of a quieter midweek in the world of college basketball. We do have the Jimmy V Classic tonight, including UConn, Florida, the defending, the last 3 national champions. But I want to talk a little bit about the Kentucky Wildcats, a total disaster of a season. But can it be saved as a star player, maybe on the verge of coming back from injury? Before we get started, a couple quick reminders. Make sure you're subscribed to Air Torres Pod YouTube channel. On YouTube, we are closing in on 68,000 subscribers. I've told you, the goal is to get to 70K before 2026. I think we can get there, but we cannot do it without your support. So if you are not subscribed, make sure to do so. And if you are, make sure that you are telling friends and all that good stuff. Speaking of good stuff, Apple, Spotify, if you prefer to listen on podcasts, and I know there are still quite a few of you who do, make sure you subscribe and download on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Also, before we get started, listen, you know what I'm doing after this show today? I'm headed to the airport. I got to shoot down to Nashville for a couple days. Long story, some personal, some professional, etc. But I bring it up because while I'm down in Nashville, you know where I'm stopping? Mint Kentucky Downs, Franklin, Kentucky, the brand new Circa Sportsbook. Okay, so Circa, listen, it is the crown jewel of Las Vegas right now. Best place to watch games, best place to hang out, all of that. They are our official hotel and casino partner. What's amazing about Circa, though, is that in addition to the beautiful property that they have in Las Vegas, they have just opened up a brand new sports book at Mint Kentucky Downs in Franklin, Kentucky. The kids call it the Mint. Okay, so all of the same great amenities that you have in Vegas, you can get at the Mint, Franklin, Kentucky, Mint Kentucky Downs. So I'm actually probably going to try to do the show from the Mint later this week. It's only about 35, 40 minutes from Nashville, so fired up to do that. And yeah, just fired up. And what I would say is if you're looking for a place, if you're on that Kentucky-Tennessee border, you need a place to watch some games. You don't want to download a bunch of apps. You don't want to subscribe to this app and that app, whatever. Mint Kentucky Downs, Franklin, Kentucky. By the way, as we get towards March, we will be doing some live events down there. Now, I need the Wildcats and I need the Vols to figure some things out on the basketball court. We'll be talking about one of them in a minute. But thank you to our casino and hotel partners, Mint Kentucky Downs, Franklin, Kentucky, which is home to the brand new Circa Sportsbook. With that said, it is a busy Tuesday in the world of sports. There is no more time to waste. People, let's go ahead and get to the topic of the day. Topic of the day. So listen, the last time that I was live with you folks, you fine folks, you lovely folks, this incredible audience that we have built, the college football playoff bracket had just come out, okay? And obviously the big conversation was those final 2 spots, those final 4 teams, Alabama, Notre Dame, BYU, and Miami. They came into Sunday in that order. Alabama and Miami get in. Notre Dame and BYU get left out. And so where we last left things, I got to take an L for it, because when we left, we had somebody in the chat, it might have been Luke, I can't remember, said, Torres, do you think Notre Dame being left out of the college football playoff, is this the final push to get them into a conference? Because I think whoever mentioned that conversation basically acknowledged what I acknowledged. They really had no real resume to speak of, right? You play a bunch of crappy ACC teams, you get USC. By happenstance, Texas A&M happened to be on the schedule, but there just wasn't a lot of meat on the bone of the resume. And so if you go back to Monday or Sunday's show, I said, Notre Dame, this isn't the SEC. This isn't Greg Sankey. Nobody's throwing a fit. Nobody's whatever. Torres has to take the big old L, because I was dead wrong on this. I thought Notre Dame was going, I thought Notre Dame, they're bigger than this. They're above this. This isn't how they operate. They look at the rest of college football throwing tantrums all the time, and they look down on college football. No. Greg Sankey, SEC, I owe you an apology, because Notre Dame has thrown a tantrum for the ages, which I think is actually going to be studied for generations to come, because I cannot believe what Notre Dame has done over the last couple of days, okay? So first off, we don't have to go through the whole Notre Dame opting out of a bowl game. It happened a little bit after we went off air. I thought it was completely soft. I thought it was completely weak. And I give credit to basically everybody on social media for agreeing with me. I haven't seen one Notre Dame fan really even defend it. Like, I maybe somebody's out there saying they shouldn't have done it, but I give everybody else credit for saying, listen, there is value in showing up. There's value in playing bowl games. By the way, this Tuesday show last week, I criticized Steve Sarkisian for pretending like he had a college football playoff case. Well, if I'm going to criticize Sark a week ago, let me give him a little bit of credit, because him and the Texas Longhorns are showing up to play Michigan in the Citrus Bowl. I think Sark realizes I have a young team that can win a national championship next year. Let me get those 15 extra practices, and let me get an extra game under our belts as we go into the 2026 season. So again, I give everybody credit for basically saying, no, Notre Dame, enough with the crap, okay? But if we thought just simply opting out of a bowl game was bad, it got much worse on Monday, because on Monday, Notre Dame started going after not only one of its biggest partners, but I would argue a partner that has done a lot for them while asking very little in return, and that is the ACC, the Atlantic Coast Conference. Okay, so I think everybody knows the setup with the ACC. I think we know the deal there. Notre Dame gets to stay independent in football. All of their other sports get to be in the ACC, so they have conference affiliation. You're not flying everybody all over the country. And Notre Dame, in its agreement, does play 5 ACC schools over the course of a season. But again, think about the benefits for Notre Dame. All your non-revenue in basketball, all your non-revenue sports plus basketball get a conference to play in. You get to remain independent in football, and you still get a bunch of power conference games on your schedule. And oh, by the way, Notre Dame actually gets a cut of the ACC TV deal, which is crazy to think about. So I bring it up because it has felt like a pretty advantageous relationship to me. The counter is Notre Dame seems to vehemently disagree. That is because on Monday, Notre Dame AD Pete Bevilacqua, I don't know. Bottom line is, though, he went on a media tour rampage. Basically, it was really Sunday into Monday. But on Monday, he appeared on Dan Patrick, and his sights were directly set on the ACC, his frustration stemming for the ACC having the audacity to stand up for Miami, to push for Miami, a full member in the ACC, to make the college football playoff over Notre Dame, which at least in football is an independent. Here was Notre Dame's AD on the Dan Patrick Show.
What role did the ACC play in any of this, in your opinion?
Well, I would tell you, I mean, again, I have tremendous respect for Miami. You know, great team, great school. Their athletic director, Dan Radakovich, is a good friend. And all the teams in the ACC, great, wonderful universities. We have no gripes about any of the schools in the ACC. But we were mystified by the actions of the conference. to attack, their biggest really business partner in football and a member of their conference in 24 of our other sports. And I would tell you, Dan, I wouldn't be honest with you if I didn't say that they have certainly done permanent damage to the relationship between the conference and Notre Dame.
What do you mean?
Just we didn't appreciate the fact that we were singled out repeatedly and compared to Miami. Not by Miami. Miami has every right to do that. But it raised a lot of eyebrows here that the conference was taking shots at us. And, that's just not something we chose to do. We wouldn't choose to do that in the future, and people might disagree with us, but that's just not something that we'd be comfortable with. And again, we have no problem with any of these teams. These are all great teams.
That was Notre Dame AD Pete Bevacqua. I'm going to call him Bevilacqua because that's always how I've heard his name pronounced. It doesn't look like that on paper. Pete, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. I apologize. But you know what I don't apologize for? You and Notre Dame acting like a bunch of big, whiny babies. All right? So let's go ahead and dive into this. First of all, I'll say this. Dan Patrick, legend in our business. The best thing Dan Patrick does is interviews. Did you hear the one-word follow-up question when Pete Bevilacqua, as I'm going to call him, basically said they've done irreparable damage or whatever, and Dan Patrick just said, why? That was a great follow-up. Simple, straight to the point, gives the guy the floor, and then he basically buries the league, okay? And so for people wondering, like I know a lot of you have full-time jobs, you have kids, you have grandkids, you have wives, you have whatever. You don't have time to look into all the pettiness that goes on in the world of college sports. Frankly, that's what I'm here for, right? So when I heard this quote, I said, why is he mad at the ACC? Besides the fact that they actually have a pretty sweetheart deal, like what is everyone so fired up about? And so I actually give credit to ESPN. ESPN found the original tweet that has apparently triggered Notre Dame. I mean, this is like some middle school drama here, okay? So this is the tweet. Matt, you could pop up the blind resume tweet. Okay, so this was from the ACC football Twitter page where it basically said, blind resume. One team has a head-to-head win. One team has 3 top 25 wins. One team has 4. And it goes on and on down the list. And, I think anybody with a brain could kind of figure out, okay, this is the team that each one is talking about. Well, the payoff from the ACC official Twitter page was as follows. Who you got? The follow-up tweet was... Can pop that up, Matt, if we have it. If we don't, there it is. It said, no hypotheticals, just facts, Miami. That is what Notre Dame is so fired up about. And so sad and so upset, and they want to grab their little bottle and cry because they're so sad that the ACC picked on them. Listen, I don't have kids, okay? This is some middle school stuff. Like, this is like, oh my goodness, the ACC, when they were so mean to us on social media. What are we even doing, Notre? First of all, I thought you were some institution of higher learning and you're above the fray. No. This is High School Musical crap. Like, what are we even doing? Let's go ahead and dive in. First of all, and I think everybody's made the point. I saw Luke in the chat before we even got going here. Luke's exactly right. The ACC should go too bad for Miami. You know why? Because Miami is a full partner of the league. Miami is a full partner of the league, okay? Notre Dame, yes, is part of the ACC. And I do think, to Pete Bevilacqua's point, and that's what I'm going to call him, I do think that, like, they are a very valuable piece of the ACC ecosystem, this being Notre Dame, but they're independent in football. They have their own TV contract. They're milking off of the ACC's contract for its other sports. And so the ACC should go to bat for Miami. And that's without even taking into consideration that the ACC didn't really go to bat for Miami. All they did was present a list of facts on a piece of paper that then proved that Miami actually had the better resume. Listen, we could use any real-world example, right? You can go to the doctor, and they could tell you, you have high blood pressure, you need to lose weight, they could do whatever. Don't blame the doctor if he's calling you overweight or whatever. If you got to lose 50 pounds, that's on you. That's not on the doctor. And it's not on the ACC that, one, they went to bat for their key, entity. But then, two, on top of that Miami actually did have a better resume. And by the way, this goes back to what we talked about on Sunday is, listen, I really think I largely have no bias in all of this. My alma mater, the only other independent in major college football, by the way, UConn, will probably never play for an ACC or never play for a conference title, never play for a college football playoff berth. So I can look at all of this objectively. And if I thought Notre Dame had a better resume than Miami, I would absolutely say it. No doubt about it. But they didn't. And so the ACC, all they did was list facts. It's no different than the doctor going to you going to the doctor saying, Doc, I don't feel good. I'm out of breath when I walk up the stairs. Hey, lose 50 pounds. That's not an opinion. That's just a fact, okay? And so I bring it up because it is just a crazy situation. But what I will say is this. Again, we did hear from the AD, and he did say, quote, that this situation has caused permanent damage for the ACC and Notre Dame. And so I guess my big question is this Notre Dame's way to try and get out of the ACC, their current deal, and maybe end up somewhere else? Now, at first thought, I kind of just sat there and said, it's not going to happen, whatever. But I think the AD was very strategic in saying that this was, causing quote unquote permanent damage. I don't think he said that term by accident. I think he's trying to set things up where they get out of this ACC deal. And I think two things can be true. I think one, the ACC deal is very advantageous for Notre Dame. As I've said, 5 games against ACC opponents. You still get to remain independent. You still get to schedule 7 games of your choosing. And in a world where the SEC is going to 9 games, where the Big Ten is at 10 games, it's actually a very nice setup for Notre Dame. I think the big question becomes 2 things. One, can they even get out of a contract with the ACC? We know the ACC, their grant of rights, the TV deal essentially, really it's about 2030. So about 5 years from now, things get a little easier to kind of, for lack of a better term, get out of. But 2, we can criticize Notre Dame for a lot of things. The one thing that is indisputable is this. They do still move the needle, especially when they're playing good competition. And I do think there would be some value to other conferences for a relationship with Notre Dame. And so I want to go ahead and give Andy Staples some credit from On3, because Andy Staples, by the way, I should mention, Matt, we might as well pop up the ACC commissioner tweet because he did sort of run back some of the stuff, but he didn't. I should mention this really quick. The ACC commissioner, Jim Phillips, did release a statement. The University of Notre Dame is an incredibly valued member of the ACC. There is tremendous respect and appreciation for the entire institution. With that said, when it comes to football, we have a responsibility to support and advocate for all 17 of our football-playing member institutions, and I stand behind our conference efforts to do just that leading up to the College Football Playoff Selection Committee show on Sunday. At no time was it suggested by the ACC that Notre Dame was not a worthy candidate for inclusion in the field. We are thrilled for the University of Miami while also understanding and appreciating the significant disappointment of the Notre Dame players, coaches, and program. All right, so enough on Notre Dame, enough on the ACC. The ACC, by the way, I'll give Jim Phillips a little credit. He basically said what we did. I got to protect my full-time member. Like, what am I supposed to do? Not advocate for Miami? Anyway, the question then becomes, is there anything Notre Dame can do? Will they try to get out of this ACC deal? And I'll give credit to Andy Staples. On3, now he wrote an article behind a paywall. You know our policy, we don't share stuff behind paywalls. But there was a tweet from the On3 official Twitter account that basically laid out Andy's argument. This is what On3 says. 1, if Notre Dame is really that mad at the ACC, it should call the Big Ten or SEC. Andy Staples writes. Could Notre Dame, and I'm going to read all 3 and then we'll go through each individually. Could Notre Dame's general counsel, their lawyers, determine the ACC's alleged politicking for Miami gives Notre Dame legal grounds to break its agreement? I'll just say this. I'm not a lawyer. I'll leave it up to the lawyers to figure out if that's possible. These are the 2 more interesting ones. Propose moving all non-football sports into the Big Ten and secure an annual football scheduling agreement aligning incentives with shared TV partners. 3, explore a football-focused scheduling partnership with the SEC so the Irish can add opponents that boost playoff resumes and the SEC gains lucrative TV inventory featuring Notre Dame. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into really the last 2. Again, the first one is basically can the Notre Dame use this past week as grounds to get out of their TV contract with the ACC? I'll leave that up to the lawyers. Surprise, surprise, didn't go to law school. I think I'd be a pretty good lawyer. I like to argue, but don't know all the legalities of that. So we'll leave that up to the lawyers. I think the go to the Big Ten for all sports plus a scheduling agreement, or go to the SEC specifically for a scheduling agreement, is interesting. Okay. And let me start with the SEC, because to me, I think it's kind of the coolest concept. It feels to me like the least likely that would actually happen. The thought process behind that is pretty simple. I don't think the ACC is going to let Notre Dame out of its contract with the ACC for all of its other sports and let them then play a bunch of SEC teams in football. Now, if Notre Dame wants to schedule 4 SEC teams on top of the 5, ACC teams that they're playing, they're certainly inclined to do so. But I don't know that I believe that that's going to happen. I don't know that the ACC is going to let Notre Dame out of the deal for all of their other sports. And then conversely, I don't think Notre Dame, just a hunch, has very much of an interest in joining the SEC for anything other than a football scheduling agreement. I can't see Notre Dame sending its volleyball team to Starkville, Tennessee on a Tuesday, or its golf team, or whatever, women's basketball, whatever. You get the point. Geographically, it probably makes more sense to keep all of the other sports in the ACC. Where I do think it gets more interesting, though, is that Big Ten caveat. And the Big Ten idea would basically be this: replace what they're doing with the ACC with the Big Ten. And I got to be honest, again, we can criticize Notre Dame for a lot of things. I have to imagine the Big Ten would be interested, right? Because the Big Ten geographically and academically really does align well with Notre Dame. And I do think it makes sense on a lot of fronts. One, I know this wouldn't be about anything other than football, but geographically it's the right fit, right? All of this easy flights for all the teams that are not football. But if we're looking at the big picture of football, I think what then becomes interesting is that there are a lot of games that make a lot of sense on paper that are not being played right now. One, you got Indiana right in your backyard, right? And we criticize Curt Cignetti. He doesn't schedule big out-of-conference games, whatever. Well, maybe this is the way to get Indiana and Notre Dame playing. We saw how awesome that game was in South Bend last year. Michigan has obviously been a historic rival for Notre Dame that they really don't play anymore. And so that would be interesting. Penn State, a historic rival that they really don't play anymore. We would obviously be interested in seeing Notre Dame, Ohio State, the game that we just saw in the national championship game. USC, this is an easy way to keep USC on the schedule if there was a scheduling agreement between the Big Ten and Notre Dame. And again, the caveat being, whatever, is that USC would have to, I guess, whatever. The issue is USC basically wants to play Notre Dame on their terms. They've been playing for 100 years. USC is ready to give up the rivalry. Notre Dame wants to keep it because Notre Dame knows they need big games currently on their schedule. And so these are some of the reasons it makes sense. And that's without factoring in, Notre Dame, Oregon would be pretty cool every once in a while. Notre Dame, whoever, fill in the blank. A lot of these teams would be interesting. Going to Washington would be interesting. UCLA at the Rose Bowl or SoFi Stadium, I guess. I don't know. We'll find out about that one. Would be interesting. But I just bring it up because I think it's an interesting situation that we currently find ourselves in. Pete Bevilacqua, the AD at Notre Dame, when he uses the words, "We were permanently damaged by this situation," I'm going to go ahead and take him at his word for it and believe that he means what he said. And I think just bigger picture, I probably should have made this point 10 minutes ago, is the other issue is pretty straightforward, is that part of the reason that Notre Dame was out, there aren't enough good teams in the ACC right now. So the scheduling situation only makes sense if you're playing good teams. If you're playing a bunch of lousy crap like Notre Dame played this year, Boston College stunk. Pitt, I know they were ranked at the time, stunk. Syracuse stunk. I got to give credit to NC State. They weren't terrible. And then obviously Miami. Miami was the one big game Notre Dame had on their schedule. So that to me is probably the real issue. Is I would just venture to guess that Pete Bevilacqua just wants better games because you have better games. You don't get left out at 10-2. It's an interesting setup. We'll see what happens. But when I tell you AD going full, whatever on the committee and on the ACC, didn't have that on my Monday morning bingo card. All right. Matt, if we have one or two good comments on Notre Dame, we'll get to that. Then I want to come back and talk a little portal. But before we get to the portal, Matt, any interesting comments on Notre Dame before we switch gears? No? Here we go. Luke says Notre Dame would lose 4 more games every year against a 9-game SEC schedule. Yeah, I don't get the sense that Andy, and I haven't read the article, just be honest. Again, we don't share stuff from behind a paywall. I don't think he's advocating for a 9-game SEC schedule, but I think it benefits everybody from the SEC if you can get 3, 4, 5 teams on the schedule, and you're playing 5 ACC games right now. So my assumption is if Notre Dame had a perfect world in that ACC model or the SEC model, they would keep their historic rivalries. They play Navy every year. There's actually a very interesting historical note on that it's something to do with World War II. So they don't want to take Navy off the schedule, and I actually respect that. They would love to keep USC and Stanford. USC is kind of like, whatever, take it or leave it. You get 5 SEC games on the schedule, completely changes the dynamic of everything. But I think to Luke's point, you're trading in at Boston College for, at Florida. That's a little bit of a step up in weight class. And so I think sometimes the SEC stuff is overblown, but I do think there's something to what everybody says. Caleb Downs said it this week from Ohio State. He just said it's just different when, you go to the Swamp and beat Florida. Well, guess what? Now you got to go to Neyland Stadium a week later, or you beat Tennessee at Neyland Stadium. Now you got to go to LSU a week later. So, yeah, I don't get the sense it would be a full 9-game schedule. Although I'll tell you what, I could criticize Notre Dame for a lot. I would take a 9-game SEC schedule from Notre Dame, even though I don't think that's necessarily what Andy Staples was insinuating. Any other ones before we get to take a quick break? Given that multiple members have recently sued to leave the ACC, not going to bat for Miami to appease Notre Dame would have been worse. Great call. The ACC is holding on for dear life. And so this notion that the ACC was supposed to go to bat for Notre Dame over a full member just doesn't make any sense. So we'll see what happens. This to me feels like, maybe a story that we're going to be talking about 2, 3, 5, 7 times over the course of the next 6 to 8 months. This felt calculated. And the other thing I will also add, and I promise I want to get to some portal stuff, is the one thing that I have learned in college sports is that when somebody wants something bad enough, they generally find a way. It doesn't matter if it's, getting out of a bad coaching contract, if it's NIL stuff, if it's whatever. And I think Notre Dame officially wants out of this ACC contract. I think they're using a couple random tweets to try and justify it. All right, so what we're going to do, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, college football's portal doesn't open for literally 3 weeks, but we are already starting to see big names kind of insinuate that they will be entering the portal once the season ends. We'll tell you some big names to monitor. Quick break. Be right back. All right, we're going to get back to the show in a minute, but before we do, I have so many people that reach out and say, Torres, you give me hours and hours and hours of free content every day, every month, every year. What can I do to help support the show? Well, you want to support the show and look good in the process. Make sure to check out and support the Aaron Torres Media merch store at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. Some of you wondering, what can I get in that merch store, Torres? Well, Kentucky fans, we got our Mark Pope Hope and Pope t-shirts. That is right. Mark Pope, monster first year. Year 2 is going to be even better. Get your Hope and Pope t-shirt at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. Arkansas fans, the Big Pig Invasion is coming. It is here. John Calipari has things rocking. Get your Big Pig Invasion tees. Again, aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. St. John's fans, we have our Big Rick Energy t-shirts. And if you're just a college basketball fan in general, guess what? Your March is for Day Drinking shirt. That is the shirt that you need year-round, but especially for the next NCAA tournament. You can order yours now. By the way, football fans, we got you covered too. Nebraska fans, new era, new rules, the t-shirt that you need before the start of this coming season. And oh, by the way, if you're a Colorado fan, if you're just a Coach Prime fan, we have our Dion shirts and hats, more of them than we know what to do with. So to check out the full line of Aaron Torres Media merch and also support the show. Good news is we're going to have even more for the fall. Check out the Aaron Torres Media merch store at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. And for more information, you can always reach out at Aaron Torres Podcast Questions @gmail.com. All right, everybody. I'm back. Good to be back. I'll tell you what, I see a couple interesting comments in the chat. Then we will get to some CFB portal. Wendell says, am I the only one that's noticed that Notre Dame has been playing a crap schedule for the last 2 decades? Good call, Wendell. Here we go. Luke, even Fox said no to Stanford and Cal in the Big Ten. TV revenue trumps even academic elitism. That is 100% correct. Remember, the only reason that Stanford and Cal are in the ACC is because they're taking a smaller share of TV revenue. Still stupid by the ACC. Doesn't change the fact that it is an interesting caveat. All right, with that said, let's go ahead and switch gears. Okay, so it's that time of year, right? Season is over. We're getting ready for the postseason, whatever. But we are not that far from college football transfer portal season. Now, I know what you're thinking. Torres, the transfer portal doesn't even open until January 2nd. How could you possibly be talking about the college football transfer portal, okay? Well, what I will tell you is, first of all, when your school hires a general manager or director of player personnel, their literal job all day, every day is to just watch tape and get background, right? So, we're watching tape of this, UConn game against Lafayette. UConn's, who's this offensive tackle that's 6'6" for Lafayette? Let's Google him. Let's find out who his high school coach is. Let's find out if he has an agent, and let's find out if he's going to enter the transfer portal in a couple weeks, right? A quick side story, because I want to get to the meat of the topic, but I remember years ago, Jared Verse, who's now balling for the Los Angeles Rams, Florida State was playing Syracuse. They were looking at film of Syracuse, and Syracuse had played Albany earlier in the year. Like, who is this freak at Albany? And they basically started doing research on Jared Verse about 4 or 5 months before he hit the portal, and he was a key piece of 2 really good teams for Florida State, including one that won the ACC, even if, as we know, they did not make the college football playoff. So this stuff, there's an old saying that basically if you start your portal work when a player enters the portal, you are way too late. And so with the season done, the portal isn't technically open until January 2nd, but guys are already saying, look, thank you for the time. They're putting out the emotional graphics, right? Thank you for the time, but after deep consideration, I'm out, okay? And so over the last couple of days, we've gotten reports on a few different names that plan to enter the transfer portal. Just want to spend a few minutes talking about these guys, and I have a feeling this will probably be a pretty big topic into mid to late January. So first name I want to talk about, this one, interesting story, Sam Leavitt, quarterback at Arizona State. Okay, so first of all, if you remember last year, Arizona State wins the Big 12, makes the college football playoff, almost upsets Texas. And everybody remembers Cam Scatteraboo in that game. But what a lot of people forget is that Sam Leavitt was a very highly touted high school quarterback, began his career at Michigan State, didn't really work out, transfers to Arizona State, and last year was legitimately awesome for Arizona State as they won the Big 12 championship and went to the college football playoff a year ago. Almost 3,000 yards passing, 24 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. Well, he gets banged up earlier this year. He's kind of in and out of the lineup. He certainly regresses. But it was really about 2.5 weeks ago that it became pretty clear that he was probably going to enter the portal. Pete Nakos put out a report. Poor Pete Nakos. Pete Nakos is the guy, when he puts it out, 1, it's happening. But 2, he always gets the pushback from people that don't want information out. By the way, that's what a journalist is supposed to do. That's what he's doing. But I remember the Nico Iamaleava stuff in the spring. And Sam Leavitt about 3 weeks ago, Pete Nakos reported he's entering the portal. And so the Sam Leavitt's brother freaked out, posted screenshots on social media. This isn't true. Well, I bring it up because Sunday was Arizona State's team banquet. Sam Leavitt was not there. And by Monday, it was pretty clearly indicated that Sam Leavitt was going to enter the transfer portal. Okay, so again, 2 seasons ago, he was awesome. Decides to come back. This year, not so much. And I do think as he goes into his final season of but it'll be his third full season playing. I guess he was technically a redshirt in 2023. He's going for a bigger payday. And I hate to say it, it's the world that we live in. I think Arizona State, transparently, is probably struggling to raise NIL money. Like Kenny Dillingham, right around the time that the first report about Sam Levitt came out, Kenny Dillingham did this rant about why doesn't every restaurant in this town have a sandwich named after a player? Like little stuff like that. How do we get more money into this football program was essentially what he was saying. Well, Sam Levitt, nothing is official. By the way, I want to be clear with all of these guys. Nothing is official, but it feels like for all intents and purposes that he is going to be in the portal. And listen, I'm not going to start speculating on who's tampering, who's not, who's this, who's that, but he's going to be one of the, if not the most highly coveted players in the portal. And if so, I think any team that needs a quarterback, you should probably assume he is going to be in the conversation for. I think the first one that jumps out is Miami. Not accusing Miami of tampering, not accusing anyone of anything. I'm just saying Miami has a history with transfer portal quarterbacks. Say that 10 times fast. And to their credit, they've had success. I know everybody wants to tear down Mario Cristobal, but the bottom line is look at his track record. Cam Ward, number 1 overall pick, 10 wins a season ago. Carson Beck, it's easy to forget now. Carson Beck was trending in the total wrong direction. And I'm not saying he's the answer to all of life's quarterback problems, but a pretty good year. He'll probably be a second-round pick this year, going to the college football playoff at 10-2. And so Miami has a track record of having success here. So nothing's official with Sam Levitt, but that's a school that makes sense. Texas Tech is another one, and we'll see what ends up happening from here. But the one thing I will say, like I said, I'm assuming that there are already schools in contact with his agent, which I believe is his brother. And I think by the time he actually enters the portal on January 2nd, I would assume it'll be a pretty quick recruitment. Again, I'm just using common sense, just deducting stuff. I honestly haven't heard anything, but I think Miami would make a ton of sense. And I think there's a bunch of other schools that need quarterbacks. By the way, Texas Tech, Will Hammond obviously is the backup to Baron Morton. Does Will Hammond feel like the long-term answer? If not, they may be looking for a quarterback. So those are just a couple schools to keep an eye on. Let's keep it going. Transfer portal. Next name up. It is certainly a name everybody knows. I don't know if it's a name everybody likes, but it is Jackson Arnold. Okay, so this time last year, Jackson Arnold was at Oklahoma. It didn't work out. And I dubbed myself a Jackson Arnold truther. I said, raw deal at Oklahoma, goes there to play for Jeff Lebby. Jeff Lebby leaves, bad OC at Oklahoma. Just give him a fresh start with some better coaching at Auburn. Well, in Jackson Arnold's defense, I don't know if he actually got better coaching at Auburn because the offense was great once Hugh Freeze was gone. But the offense was also great once Jackson Arnold was benched. And the guy that I once upon a time called myself a Jackson Arnold truther, the counter to that is that the offense got much better without him, and he was absolutely terrible. And by the middle of the season, I literally tweeted something out about Jackson Arnold is the worst decision maker I've ever seen in college football. And I watched DJ Uiagalelei for 3 years. But he is in the portal. It's not a surprise. Ashton Daniels replaced Jackson Arnold late in the year. He was better. He wasn't great. Deuce Knight played against Mercer. He was phenomenal. And so those two guys are coming back. Remember, Ashton Daniels was able to preserve his red shirt. And so it becomes pretty clear that Jackson Arnold there is no future for him at Auburn, nor should there be. What I am curious about, one is third time's a charm, but two, what is the interest level for a guy that has now failed at 2 different major conference programs? By the way, I will tell you this. I know for a fact there's one SEC coach, prominent SEC coach in the college football playoff that's actually I think he still is good. He just needs the right coaching. We'll see what ends up happening with Jackson Arnold. I have no strong opinions on if he'll end up at another Power 4 or have to go down to the group of 5. The obvious one is Mississippi State. He almost committed to Mississippi State last year. Again, Jeff Lebby was the guy that recruited him out of high school. They are losing Blake Shapen. I think the big question becomes 2 things. One, they have the freshman there, Kamario Taylor, who is actually pretty good. But then 2, is Jeff Lebby just we got to a bowl game at 5-7 because everybody else opted out. I'm not putting my career on the line for Jackson Arnold, who so far to this point in his career is a coach killer. So we'll see what happens. I saw somebody mention West Virginia with Rich Rod. I actually thought that was a very interesting match that could work. So we'll see what ends up happening. Listen, all these new coaches at these G5s are going to need quarterbacks, Memphis, Tulane, whatever. So we'll see what ends up happening. But I'm just curious what the market will be for Jackson Arnold this year. One more quarterback that I think is just worth mentioning really quick. Jaden Craig from Harvard. Okay, so Jaden Craig from Harvard was Harvard's all-time leading passer and all-time leading touchdown passer in terms of both yardage and touchdown passes. So he enters the portal on, I don't think he didn't technically enter the portal, but he may have actually entered the portal. Let me explain why. He is a senior at Harvard, okay? Now, unless I misunderstand this, I don't think graduate players can play at Harvard, can play in the Ivy League. I think Ivy League schools, you have 4 years to play for. And if you've graduated from college, they don't just let you play a 5th, 6th, 7th year. And so you follow Jaden Craig's career. He's a guy that NFL teams think is a legitimate NFL draft prospect. A lot of NFL teams came through Harvard this year. And I think if he entered the NFL draft, he would be like a 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round pick. Well, he told Pete Thamel, among others, that he plans on entering the transfer portal and getting a shot at the FBS level. By the way, the Ivy League forbids graduate students from playing varsity sports. I was correct on that. So he's kind of in an interesting spot. One of the best players in the history of Harvard football, but he's already graduated, which with a year of eligibility, which means he can only either transfer to, likely the FBS or go to the NFL draft. So it sounds like he's going to stay in college. I think he's going to be an interesting prospect to follow. Now, listen, 61% completion percentage. He was very good at a completely different level. I am not ready yet to basically insinuate that he's going to be, one of the biggest this, the biggest that. But I do think somebody is going to take a chance on him at the power conference level. So we'll see what ends up happening there. 25 touchdown passes this year, 61% completion percentage. Just curious, big picture. I think he ends up at the power conference level. I just don't know if it's like I don't know, like if South Carolina lost to Norris Sellers, is that a realistic spot for him or not? I don't know. Just bring it up to very simply say he's an interesting name. A couple more interesting names. CJ Baxter from Texas. This is a little bit of a sad story. CJ Baxter, number 1 running back in his high school class, was part of the Arch Manning recruiting class that I think largely has frankly elevated Texas football. Colin Simmons was in that class. There was a couple others. CJ Baxter was awesome as a freshman. Okay. So as a freshman, this was Texas's last year in the Big 12. He was the Big 12 newcomer of the year, about 700 yards rushing. And unfortunately, an injury before last season, missed all of the 2024 season, tried to come back this year, really never got going. And by that point, I hate to say it, other guys had surpassed him on the depth chart. Now, the thing about ACL injuries and knee injuries, most people say it takes you a full year to get back to feeling 100% like yourself. And so I just bring it up because I do wonder if a fresh start with fresh legs is going to do him the trick. I still think there's something there. As I said, Big 12 newcomer of the year. I think he ends up back at a power conference school. Someone is going to need a running back. He is going to need a shot. I would expect him to end up at a power conference school. You know who else I would expect to end up at a power conference school? Perry Thompson, former basically 5-star recruit, 5-star wide receiver. So I remember it would have been 3 summers ago now. I did a segment on Perry Thompson in the middle of the summer. He flipped from Alabama. DeMarcus Riddick, who has been a very good linebacker for Auburn, flipped from Georgia. And it was like the first moment where you're like, oh, Hugh Freeze has some real recruiting momentum. They were part of a monster top 10 class in 2024 that included Cam Coleman. 2025 class was top 10. And this is, by the way, why Auburn was one of the most coveted jobs in college football this year. Whatever you think of Hugh Freeze, and the coaching certainly left a lot to be desired, there is no doubt that he was an elite recruiter and left the cupboard full. Now, unfortunately, Perry Thompson is not going to stay at Auburn. And I just in some ways feel bad. Maybe there's something I don't know. Producer Matt can tell me off air if there was something bigger picture. But let's be honest. Auburn didn't throw the ball. Basically, they didn't throw the ball well his 2 years on campus. So that's just indisputable. And then, two, when they did, the focal point of the offense was going to be Cam Coleman, who, frankly, is, he's not Jeremiah Smith, but he's that next level down. And so when we're talking about Perry Thompson as a 5-star, one of the 6 or 7 best wide receivers in a class that included Jeremiah Smith, Cam Coleman, and Ryan Williams, the kid is talented. Just one of those things where took a bet on Auburn. I think it was the right bet at the time. I think we all thought the offense wouldn't be an issue under Hugh Freeze. Didn't work out. He's entering the portal. I think that he's probably going to be pretty successful pretty quickly at another school. By the way, I forgot to do this last segment. I was going to just quickly spend half a second on the Heisman Trophy. So we'll talk Heisman Trophy right now really quick. The Final Four are headed to New York City. I thought about this when I was talking about something else. Diego Pavia, Fernando Mendoza, Jeremiah Love, and Julian Sayin. I have no super strong opinions. I think the three, Fernando Mendoza, Diego Pavia, Julian Sayin, are Julian Sayin and Jeremiah Love. Of those 4, I think 3 of them, I would have no problem with any of them winning. Not a knock on Julian Sayin, but I think Julian Sayin, listen, threw to a lot of good talent, right? Was able to run the ball when they needed to. Julian Sayin basically until essentially the Indiana game didn't really have any pressure on him at all. Like literal pressure in the pocket, could just sit back and throw darts all day. It was a great statistical season. I would personally probably give the award to Mendoza. Yes, it's a little bit of recency bias, but he's unbelievable. Indiana was already elevated before he got there. But, if Pavia wins it, I think Pavia is the only other guy that could win it. I know that the circa odds are now favoring heavily Fernando Mendoza. I would have no problem if Pavia won it. He has elevated Vanderbilt, no doubt. I still don't know how good of a coach Clark Lee is without him. But Diego Pavia, Jeremiah Love, Fernando Mendoza going to New York. So, yeah, those are your Heisman Trophy odds. All right, so what we're going to do, we're going to take a quick break, come back. When we do, one more story I do want to get to. Little college hoops. We're going to enter a slow stretch for college hoops. We're going to have some good weekend games, but these midweeks are going to be quiet as we enter final season. A lot of schools are in finals, and so because of that, a lot of schools are going to be off here these next few weeks. Well, we got UConn, Florida tonight in the Jimmy V Classic. We also have Kentucky, NC Central, but here's the story. Is Kentucky finally about to get their full roster back and healthy? We'll discuss that next. Quick break. Be right back. All right, we're going to get back to the show in a minute, but before we do, you know what we got to do. We got to thank our friends. We got to thank our partners. We got to go ahead and thank Cauley Puffs and CauleyPuffs.com. Yeah, you see the logo on the back of the screen right here. Okay, so I've told you all about Cauley Puffs, but family-owned company, not far from where I live. Joey, a huge sports fan, and one day he was sitting on the couch and he said, you know what? I need a snack that is both healthy but delicious, something my kids are going to love, something my family's going to love, something I'm going to love. And so he came up with Cauley Puffs. This is the new age health food snack. You don't need to go to the grocery aisle and buy all that crap, the Doritos, the Fritos. No, my friends, you need Cauley Puffs. Baked, not fried, avocado oil, no grease, healthy ingredients. But here's the best part. They taste freaking delicious. Actually, there's another best part. In addition to tasting delicious, in addition to being healthy, they are also taking care of listeners of the Aaron Torres pod. Okay, so check this out. All you got to do is go to CauleyPuffs.com. That's CauleyPuffs.com. CauleyPuffs.com. And you can get 15% off any purchase with the promo code Torres. That's Torres, Torres. It's that simple. 15% off any purchase. 1 bag to try them out. 100 bags to cater a party. Doesn't really matter. Promo code Torres. CauleyPuffs.com gets you 15% off. Cauley Puffs also available on Amazon. You obviously can't get the promo code there, but CauleyPuffs.com, CauleyPuffs.com, promo code Torres gets you 15% off any purchase. Thank you to our friends at Cauley Puffs. All right, everybody. I am back. Good to be back. So, Matt, before we get to UK, I do see we have a super chat or two in the comment section. Let's get to Bill's comment first. Bill, thank you for the super chat. Make sure I didn't mess up my mic here. Thank you for the super chat. He says, Notre Dame, join a conference or get the hell out of college sports. Okay. All I will say is this. Two things can be true. I sort of like Notre Dame being an independent. I think it's cool. I think it's different. I think as we get deeper and deeper into this SEC, Big Ten, AFC, NFC world, I think it's kind of cool that Notre Dame is just doing its own thing. Now, there's two things with that, though. I can like that. I can also acknowledge if I was Ohio State, if I was most of these SEC schools, I wouldn't schedule Notre Dame because it would benefit them a lot more than it would schedule me. This is what USC is currently going through. And what I would also add is this. Notre Dame actively choosing to be an independent is fine, and there are certainly benefits to it, but it can't be all benefits and no consequences. Well, the consequence is you don't have a great schedule most years, and when you don't have a great schedule, you can't be mad when you lost the two biggest games on your schedule. Listen, we've talked about this. I said it on Sunday's show. We talked about this in August of this year. August of this year, we openly talked about if Notre Dame goes 0-2 in its first two games, which was at Miami and Texas A&M at home, they were going to have a really hard time building a playoff resume. And that's exactly how it happened. And here's the crazy part. Things actually kind of worked out for Notre Dame on the back half of the year. USC was better than people thought, finishing 9-3 overall. That ended up being a better win than we expected. Pitt was a ranked opponent when Notre Dame played them. Now, I know we don't count ranked opponents when you play them, but Pitt was better than we expected. And so you can't have it both ways. There are consequences to everything, every decision, right? Going too heavy in the portal, there's consequences to that. Going too light in the portal, there's consequences to that. Being an independent, firing your head coach, hiring a new head coach, retaining this coach, there's a million different scenarios. Everything you do has consequences positively and negatively. And Notre Dame can't get all of the benefits of this ACC deal and then complain when it blows up in your face like it did. So great question by Bill, and thank you for the super chat. Luke, who, oh, by the way, is a member of the AT Pod Show, which we appreciate your support. You can become a member. All you got to do is just click that join tab on the homepage. It's, $4 a month goes a long way as we get set to travel, do a lot of different stuff. Just help support the show. At some point we're going to start doing some live chats and exclusive stuff for members. But if you want to support the show, it's cheaper than a beer at happy hour, $4.99 a month. We appreciate your support. And Luke, we're talking about transfer portal quarterbacks. Luke says Lenora Sellers is likely out of South Carolina unless new OC Kendall Briles can make a strong pitch. One, again, Luke, thank you for the membership. Two, I think there's two interesting things there. One, there have already been insinuations that Lenora Sellers may transfer this year rather than entering the NFL draft. I saw Todd McShay a few weeks ago insinuate that Miami may have put in some work early on Lenora Sellers. We'll see if that's the case. And then the opposite is true as well. I do like the OC hire. We had this on the docket for stuff to talk about today, but I'm running a little bit short on time. I do like the Kendall Briles hire. I'm just curious to see, to Luke's point, do they retain Lenora Sellers? All right, really quickly, let's go ahead and wrap the show. Little college hoops. So tonight, oh, by the way, what do we got here? What is this? What's up, Torres? Finally catching live. Much respect. JDB Pitbull. JDB, we appreciate your support, my man. Thank you so much for your support of the Aaron Torres pod. We go live every Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, usually Wednesday. I'm traveling tomorrow. That's a little bit up in the air. We'll see what ends up happening. All right, college hoops. Couple intriguing games tonight. Jimmy V Classic. If we do a Wednesday show, we will react to UConn, Florida, matchup of the last three national champions. Not trying to sound arrogant, but if Terrace Reed plays for UConn, I think UConn goes full BTA belt to ass because I think the backcourt is just much better. UConn, a 4.5-point favorite in the Circus Sportsbook. The early game, AJ DeBonsa and BYU against Clemson. I obviously like BYU in that game. With that said, there is another game on the schedule for Tuesday night. I know a lot of you will not watch this until probably Wednesday or Thursday. So to be clear, we are recording this segment before Kentucky takes on North Carolina Central. I was going to say North Central Carolina, which, whatever. They're playing North Carolina Central, okay? And so I don't think that there is anything that is going to come out of the North Carolina Central game that makes Kentucky fans. Okay, let's just start the segment over. What am I doing here? I'm tripping over all my words. Okay, let's start off. Kentucky, they stink. We know that. We are recording before they play North Carolina Central on Tuesday evening, okay? And so at the end of the day, I don't think there is very much that Kentucky can do against North Carolina Central that is going to make them feel better about the current situation of their team, a team that currently sits at 5-4 overall with 0 wins of note as we now enter the middle of January, okay? But what I will say about Kentucky is this. I've been very critical of Mark Pope. Again, by the way, maybe they do literally beat North Carolina Central by 100 and everybody's feeling better coming into the back half of out-of-conference play and then, of course, league play. But what I'll say about Kentucky is 2 things. One, I have been critical of Mark Pope because to me, it's not even about the wins and losses. It's about the effort. It's about falling down 20 to Gonzaga. It's about being down 19-2 at one point against the Gonzaga Bulldogs, okay? But the one thing I also can't deny, I can be critical of Mark Pope while also acknowledging that all year long he has been playing without a fully stacked deck and without the team that he expected to have going into the season. We know about Jalen Lowe, right? So Jalen Lowe, listen, and again, if we want to defend Mark Pope, remember, Jalen Lowe was a guy that had no injury history at Pitt. I went back and looked it up to make sure, but he missed 1 game in 2 seasons at Pitt prior to coming to Kentucky. Okay, so he had no injury history to speak of, comes to Kentucky, hurts his shoulder in the preseason, tries to come back, hurts it again, and has basically not really played coming into Tuesday's game against North Carolina Central. Maybe he goes for 40 against North Carolina Central. I don't know, okay? Many of you are going to watch this after the North Carolina Central game. That's the only reason I keep bringing it up. But at the same time, the whole team was built around Jalen Lowe. Mark Pope is trying to patchwork together a backcourt without its starting point guard. But the other variable, which we all know, is this. Jaden Quaintance, who is the best NBA prospect on this team, the best big man on this team, probably the best overall player on this team, pound for pound, has also not been available. And so this rambling point to get me to this is to say that we might be finally getting some good news on Jaden Quaintance. Kentucky might be getting him back. We might be seeing something close to Kentucky at 100%. And if we do, they can make up for a lot of negative vibes in the first half of the season because I still think there's a lot of basketball to be played, and I still think they have a chance to do special things if they can get healthy. So Jaden Quaintance, we know the story. Freshman last year at Arizona State, 17 years old. Wasn't even eligible for the NBA draft, okay? But last year plays at Arizona State, averages about 10 points, 8 boards, and about 3 blocks per game as a 17-year-old in the most physical league in college basketball. Enters the transfer portal, but we also find out that he injured his knee and had surgery. When he entered the portal, I said I believe he's the best big man in the portal, maybe the best player in the portal, period. But he commits to Kentucky, and I'll say, we had him on this show in May, and he said, I think I'll be back in the gym well before the start of the season, and I'm hoping to be back sometime early in the season. Now, I went back and listened to the interview on Tuesday morning to see what he said. He did say that he hoped to be ready to play by the start of the season. But if you listen to Mark Pope over the summer, he did say, listen, we're not, we hope to have him back as early as possible without rushing the process either. Well, in the last week, we have found out that, I was going to say Jalen Lowe, but Jaden Quaintance has been able to finally get back practicing in a 5-on-5 setting. So in other words, he's practicing at full strength. He just might not be playing for a little while. And it's something that Mark Pope addressed at his Monday press availability in the lead up to the North Carolina Central game. Mark Pope asked about Jaden Quaintance's health, said, quote, JQ is continuing to make progress. He's still a ways away from actually seeing in-game live action, but he's making tremendous progress. So those guys are doing pretty well. There you go. So Mark Pope, Matt, you can pop it down for a second. So Mark Pope basically saying that, we're taking it slow. We're continuing to make progress. He's still a ways away from actually seeing in-game live action. Jack Pilgrim, best Kentucky beat writer that I'm aware of, did tweet out, or he wrote an article on KSR that said, quote, put that one up now, Matt, don't expect to see Jaden Quaintance back this week against NC Central or Indiana, but sources tell KSR that a December debut remains very much on the table for the talented sophomore forward. All right, so let's do a little bit of mental math here. Kentucky plays NC Central on Tuesday night. Maybe you watch this on Wednesday and Jaden Quaintance played, and he played 22 minutes and had 13 points and 11 rebounds. I don't expect that to happen, and according to Jack Pilgrim's reporting, he doesn't expect that to happen either, nor does he expect Jaden Quaintance to come back for Indiana. Now, after that, you have a December 20th game right before Christmas against the St. John's Red Storm. And then after that, you have Bellarmine right before the Christmas holiday. After that, you don't play for 9 days. Then you open SEC play at Alabama. So what I can tell you is a few things. One, I do still think we're a little bit of a ways away. And I think Mark Pope, I could criticize Mark Pope for a lot of things. I think he's protecting himself from a world of getting everyone too excited for Jaden Quaintance before he's ready to come back, because again, Mark Pope needs any sort of positive vibes that he can possibly get, right? So he doesn't want to say give him a day, give him a week. He doesn't want to put a time frame on it. He keeps saying we're making progress, this and that. He wants to be non-committal. What I do think is if he's practicing 5-on-5 and Jack says he's going to be back by the end of December, I would kind of circle that Bellarmine game as probably a game that would make sense to get him back on the court. Let me explain why. One, listen, you certainly don't want to rush him, right? But if he's playing 5-on-5, he's pretty close. I think the big issue now, you don't want to rush him, and it's not always just because of, re-aggravating the injury, but it's also about your body getting back to full strength in other areas as well, right? You've been so busy for Jaden Quaintance, I think everybody knows, had knee surgery. I think I mentioned it. But, you start worrying about the knee, but what about the hamstrings? What about the quads? What about the ankles? What about all of the things that are attached to the knee, right? You've been so focused on getting that knee back to full strength that I'm not a doctor, but it's pretty common sense. You want to make sure that everything else around the knee can stabilize it so there's no issues. So I don't think it's going to be North Carolina Central. I don't think it's going to be Indiana. And I'll say this, I think St. John's, it's a big game, especially if you lose to Indiana. It's a really big game. But the counter to that is tough spot to put Jaden Quaintance in. One of the best front courts in college basketball with Zuby Ejiofor and Bryce Hopkins and all that. The Bellarmine game seems to make sense because the counter is two things. One, you don't want to put him in against St. John's. You also don't want to go into SEC play and throw him into the wars of the SEC on the road without having him get some reps. So, this is just sort of speculation on my part. Maybe he gets a few minutes off the bench just to get his legs under him against St. John's, because St. John's is still 11 days away. That's still 2 full weeks. And so I think to me, that probably makes the most sense. Get him. I know I just said he wouldn't play against St. John's, but maybe just get him some reps, get him 5 minutes just to get a sweat going back and forth. And then maybe Bellarmine is the game where, you're playing, 18 to 20 minutes and getting him going. But it sounds like he's close. And I do think there is something to Kentucky just needs this. And I'll say this. I think it's fair to criticize Kentucky for what we've seen and the lack of effort. I think it's also fair to say what Mark Pope has, which is we have a good team in this building. We just got to get everybody on the court and everybody going in the same direction. And so what I'll say is until I declare one thing, criticize me for whatever you want. Doesn't matter to me. Doesn't bother me. There are two things that I've never said. I've never said that Kentucky's season is over and they have no chance. And I've never said Mark Pope isn't the answer. I've said I have questions about Mark Pope's motivation ability, but I've never said like he can't coach basketball. He can coach basketball. And what I now want to see, can you get Jalen Lowe healthy and can you get Jaden Quaintance healthy? Because they basically solve 80% of the issues that you have right now, right? You're probably never going to be a 41% three-point shooting team as a team, but the whole team was built around Jalen Lowe attacking the basket, getting others involved. Denzel Aberdeen even said it at his press conference on Monday. Like, Jalen Lowe is a very big part of what we do. And then I think with Jaden Quaintance, he solves the other big issue. You don't have any toughness in the paint. Malachi Moreno's a true freshman. He's doing everything he can to help out, but he's limited in what he can do as an 18-year-old. Brandon Garrison is not the answer. And if you look at most of Kentucky's losses this year, the one commonality, especially in the blowouts, they're getting killed on the glass. Michigan State was plus 14 against Kentucky in their game. In other words, Michigan State had 14 more rebounds than Kentucky. Gonzaga was plus 12 in their game. And Jaden Quaintance solves, in my opinion, a lot of those issues. Kentucky also, by the way, right around 100th nationally in block shots. You had a guy who averaged 3 a game last year. I'm guessing that probably helps the scenario. So we'll see what happens. Again, I don't want to oversell how excited a Kentucky fan should or should not be. But to me, it does feel like this is a situation where get Jaden Quaintance back, get him healthy. And I do think that's when your season starts to begin. You're certainly going to have a lot of work to do in SEC play. I don't think the season's over. You do got to start tabulating wins, and you got to do it at full strength. Until we see Kentucky at full strength, it's hard to judge exactly how good or bad this team is. All right, I got to get out of here because I got to get to the airport. If you're not subscribed to the Aaron Torres pod, make sure to do so. Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Music, wherever you listen to podcasts, make sure to subscribe. Make sure to rate and review the show. Go ahead, give us a quick 5 stars. Let us know what you like, what you don't like, all that good stuff. Make sure you're following on social media at Aaron_Torres on Twitter, at Aaron Torres Pod on Instagram, Aaron Torres Podcast Questions at gmail.com. I don't know if we'll be back live on Wednesday. We'll be back live on Thursday, hopefully from the Mint at Mint Kentucky Downs in Franklin, Kentucky, the brand new Circa Sportsbook. See everybody soon. Appreciate your support of the Aaron Torres Pod.